Now, while Iran's North Korea's nuclear programs dominated headlines, countering terrorism and extremism also took center stage at the UN General Assembly last week. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and top officials from 24 countries highlighted progress made in the fight to defeat the Islamic State militant group in Iraq. Here's VOA's diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain.
It's been a hard fight, but U.S. officials say progress is being made against Islamic State militants, with more than 6 million people in Iraq and Syria no longer living in areas controlled by the terror group. Special U.S. Presidential Envoy Brett McGurk warned efforts must continue.
We need to make sure that we keep our foot on the gas and follow through.
And as Islamic State militants go into retreat, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov foresees more battles to come.
Despite
the fact that ISIL is in retreat in Syria and Iraq, we need to make quite a few additional efforts in order to stabilize the region.
During a meeting with African leaders at the UNGA Wednesday, President Donald Trump pledged U.S. help in the ongoing fight against terrorist groups on that continent.
Terrorist groups such as ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and Al-Qaeda also threaten African peace. The United States is proud to work with you to eradicate terrorist safe havens, to cut off their finances, and to discredit their depraved ideology.
A spate of terrorist attacks in Europe indicates the threat is constantly taking on new forms. European Union President Donald Tusk.
2017 showed us that Daesh, as a territorial entity, is fated for defeat. That's good news. Sadly, however, repeated terrorist attacks, also in Europe, demonstrate that the threat continues.
Asia is also no stranger to the scourge of terrorism.
Having been a target of a number of terrorist attacks myself, I personally empathize with the victims of terrorism and appreciate their need for protection.
For too long, the conflict in Afghanistan has been viewed as a civil war, said Afghan President Ashraf Ghani.
But this war is not within our soil, it is over our soil. Today there are over 20 international terrorist groups with an imposed presence on Afghan soil. The future of Afghanistan matters because we are on the front line of the global effort to eradicate the threat of terrorism.
China and Russia's foreign ministers stressed world leaders need to fight terrorism together without using what they referred to as double standards or associating terrorism with one particular ethnic group or religion. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
Well, now for more on the UN General Assembly, VOA's Margaret Besheer joins me live from the United Nations. Margaret, besides the threat of terrorism, looks like we should be worried about even a bigger threat for the entire globe.
Yes, some breaking news out of New York this morning. A little over an hour ago, the North Korean foreign minister spoke to us reporters here. He was leaving for the airport, heading back to Pyongyang, and he stopped at the microphones to tell us that a tweet that President Trump wrote on Saturday night is now being considered as a declaration of war by Pyongyang. So a serious escalation in the tensions between the U.S. and North Korea. Ri Yong-ho said that because it came from the person who occupies the White House in the United States, this is clearly a declaration of war, he said, and the world should remember that it was the United States that declared war first on North Korea. And he said because they read this as a declaration of war, they would take countermeasures, he said, including reserving the right of self-defense to shoot down U.S. strategic bombers not within North Korean airspace. So the U.S. Is flying some strategic bombing missions in the Northeast Asia area as a deterrent to North Korea, and he is basically making threats against those flights. The tweet he was referring to came from President Trump late on Saturday night after he had heard or read the statement by Mr. Ri, the foreign minister, and he said, "I just heard Foreign Minister of North Korea speak at UN. If he echoes thoughts of little Little Rocket Man, they won't be around much longer. So as you may know, Little Rocket Man is President Trump's new nickname for Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. Now, so they are seeing that as a threat against their leadership in their country.
Now, very quickly, this seems to be going beyond grandstanding or posturing. Has there been reaction from particularly the neighbors of North Korea?
Well, not to these particular comments. It's just been about an hour since he made them. But UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said last week that it's very important the two sides do not escalate the rhetoric because there could be what he called a fatal misunderstanding. And I think we're sort of in that territory now where the rhetoric has really escalated to a new level if North Korea is saying they're reading this as a declaration of war.
Wow, really, really dangerous situation there, Margaret. Thank you very much for giving us that update and the news. Well, Margaret Besheer is reporting from the United Nations. Now, for all of your UN General Assembly news, be sure to follow Margaret on Twitter @mbesheer.